Yo, welcome again, welcome guys, welcome once again to my YouTube channel. It's going to be an amazing tutorial. It's going to be amazing. So this one is about compression. Compression is one of the most talked about topic, and a lot of people seem to get it complicated. But if you understand compression, then you are close to having a good sound and a good mix, because a compressor is like one of the most used and one of the most important plugins you must have. The compressor and the EQ. Two things you can never do without. Two plugins that you can never do without. There are lots of compressors out there, but the goal is to achieve the same sound or the same thing or the sound in your head. Because I always say, you think about the sound you want to create, then you choose the right plugin to create the sound that you want. So just like before, I know most of you will be wondering why you're seeing Cubase on my screen. Yeah, I actually do all my vocals on Cubase. I use Cubase 10. I do all my vocals on Cubase, but for the sake of the screen record I'm using, it's called Bandicam, and I can't record audio out of this guy. I've tried a lot of screen recorders, but I couldn't get. So, but I just had to make this video out, I want to put out content, you understand? So that's why. So I'm going to export these vocals from here, then I'll bring them into FL Studio where I could record audio coming out from my system. Then I'll still do the same thing. It's going to be the same process. It's not about the DAW you're using, but it's about the process. So we're going to be back. I'm coming back right now. But before I go, I'd like to show you why I choose Cubase for my vocals, because it's very flexible to work on vocals, on audio. Actually, it's very easy. I could make quick cuts and then work on audios. I could transform this particular audio to a different stuff altogether. I could do a lot of quick stuff in Cubase than I could do it in FL Studio with audio. But all my beats, I make them in FL Studio because I love their pattern and how easy for me it is for me to get all my packs and easy how it's arranged. So I use the two DAWs for my workflow. So you could have one, you could have 30 if you can. So but I'll be right, but let me just export this guy and we are coming back to FL20. So let's go. Yeah, so we're back in FL Studio, and let me get straight to the point. But before I start, I have to explain compression. Let me off this silly fan. Okay, so before I start, I have to explain compression. What a compressor does is, while you're singing, I like to make my stuff very simple so that I don't want to use so much grammar where I will confuse the people that are already confused already. So, but what a compressor simply does is to check the dynamic range. But what we mean by dynamic range is, in real life, when someone sings, there is a time you can't, first of all, you can't be 100% on the microphone because you'll be moving steady, and by moving, you are reducing the intensity or the volume of the sound coming from your vocals onto the mic. And sometimes you sing at a higher energy, like when you pitch or when you sing on with you release more air depending on the word you're saying or the voice sound. You either release more air into the mic or less air. That's producing less or more sound. And by then you are giving the microphone is picking different volumes or different levels. That's why you have this. Let me show you this. That's why you have these places that looks a little bit quiet, this place that looks loud, and that's called the dynamic range. Now, what a compressor does is to try. Now, look at this other one down below. Okay. Now, this is the one lower below is the one I've already compressed and exported as wave. Now, if you watch how the image of this one on top and this one below, you find out that this one looks a little bit different than the other one. Now, look at this quiet parts and look at them here. They now look a little bit full because I've already compressed it. Now, what a compressor does is to bring up the quiet parts and take that. First of all, it takes down the very loud parts that are too loud, and then balance it, try to bring up the places that are a little bit more quiet to give you one kind of even sound, to make it more even. Now, why do we compress? Is because sometimes when the vocal gets so loud, it jumps out of the mix, or when it gets so quiet, the instrumental swallows the vocals, and that inconsistency makes it amateur. So that's the main reason why we compress not only vocals, but for this instance, I'm going to be doing it on vocals. We compress both kicks. This is Afrobeat. We compress most times, almost everything, not all the time, depending on the sound, because in Afrobeat we have a lot of sound, percussions, and the rest that are competing for relevance in the mix. So sometimes we kind of compress some certain sounds to keep them in their space. Understand? So you have to understand, practice compression. Just practice, you get better. But with this simple explanation, a compressor tries to bring down the loud parts. This is a vocal. Bring down the loud part, then take them up at the same time. So you won't have that much difference from the loud and the quiet part. So I'm going to take off the compressed vocal, and I will play this sound. Then I'll bring in some of the compressors I already loaded. So let me play this guy so you listen to how it sounds. I remember when I enter Lagos, make a hustle, make a fight for the job. My mama pray for me, she tell me, but don't only look up to God. Say street na jungle, lions stay for street, yo. Then they find out the job, work hard, yo. Don't look for trouble, do your best, yo, and the money go come. So as I enter it, oh, I met my brother, yo. Two of us from the same village, yo. I can't thank God at last I found. Okay, first of all, this is actually my song. The last song I just dropped, and the video will be out soon on this channel. So now if you watch, there are sometimes the vocal sounds a little bit louder than somewhere sounds louder, because that is how it is recorded. You don't record, there's nobody is a machine that records at the same. Sometimes as you're moving to the vibe, you are shifting your head, and you get different levels recorded into the mic. So now this is what it is. So now this is my favorite compressor, this guy. The fab filter, I use it like 99% of the time. This is my favorite. The reason why I use this kind of compressor is it's always good to have a compressor that has graphical display of what you're doing. So you see the gain reduction, you see the waves and the waveform of the vocal and everything. So you actually see your compression happening in your face. So now the first thing, there is a sweet spot. The ratio, first of all, I have to explain. The ratio is how much the compression is happening. How much are we going to compress this guy? How much are we going to bring down the loud part? That's the compression. Now, for vocals, it's usually between 3:1 or 4:1. But I like 4:1 because it's kind of like, I don't know, it's called the standard, depending on how much you want to compress. But since it's an Afrobeat, we tend to compress more, so I leave it at 4. But if it's a slow song that has a slow tempo, you wouldn't want to have that much compression on it. But Afrobeats are danceable, so we want to like make the words are coming up so fast, so we want to keep them. But if it's a song that is very slow, now you can use a slower ratio. That's a tip. Then on our attack is how fast we want the compressor to bring down the loud part. And since it's an Afrobeat, since it's an Afro song and the words are coming up so fast and the lyrics, you understand, I'm using a fast attack. But if I'm singing, if it's a slow tempo song that the words are coming up slowly, I can reduce depending on the sound I want. Then the release, most times I keep it at auto release, or somewhere between 500 milliseconds if you don't have an auto release. Then this is the threshold. Now this is the last thing I do. How the threshold is when your compressor starts getting to work. Understand? If I play this sound, now this guy here is the input, the sound coming into my compressor. Now I've kept my threshold at 0 the compressor is doing nothing. Watch here and watch the gain reduction. As I begin to bring down the threshold, and I'm telling the compressor, once it gets to this particular place in the threshold, reduce this vocal by 4:1 with a fast attack and auto release. So now let me do it in front of you. I remember when I enter Lagos, make a hustle, make a find food to chop. My mama pray for me, she tell me, but don't only look up to God. Say street na jungle, lions stay for street, yo. As you can see, as when the vocal gets to a particular threshold that I've set, it begins to bring it down. And what you have to be watching out for is somewhere around -3 dB of gain reduction. -3, or sometimes it gets to -6 depending, but most times -3 or -4, -5 is a sweet spot. You have to experiment to get the best sound. Understand? So after setting my threshold, now I started with my ratio, how much I want it to reduce, then the attack and the release, then I now start bringing down my threshold. When I get to a sweet spot, when I start seeing like -3 dB of gain reduction, then I will now either increase my gain, because as we compress, we've lost volume by the certain amount of dB, maybe -3 or -4, then I could just raise this output to maybe -3 of what we've lost. Or better still, I love this compressor because it has auto gain. Once I switch it on, then it will now guess the input of what the sound that came into the compressor, and now tries to match the volume so that it will be the same thing. So if I turn on this auto gain, you see that the vocal now get louder. I remember when I enter Lagos, make a hustle, make a find food to chop. My mama pray for me, she tell me, but don't only look up. Sometimes I don't really like the volume, sometimes I crank it up a little bit more. I could give you like a 2 dB boost. I remember when I enter Lagos, make a hustle, make a find food to. Okay, so I could give you like extra boost and the output. You now mix it to test so that it will blend with the beat or the sound that you've already done. So I don't advise you to do your compression by soloing the vocal and do your compression. Sometimes it's best to do it in the mix so that you hear how everything sounds. Now what a compressor will now do is to glue your vocal to make it belong in the mix. If you have an uncompressed vocal, the vocals will be jumping up and down, and you don't want that for your song. So it's always good to compress your sound. Now you could do with any compressor. You must not have this compressor, but just to understand what the compressor does, it's trying to reduce the loud part, increase the excuse me, by reducing the loud part and increasing the quiet part to give them almost like an even volume. And it's not good to over compress. Once you over compress, you lose dynamics. You lose, because it sounds robotic if I start speaking directly to your face at the same volume all the time. It doesn't sound real. So you don't over compress your vocals. So when you over compress, it's now limiting. So but that's a case for another day. So but I could switch this guy off and load another compressor. This is my second compressor. We could achieve the same goal with it. So you could watch me do the same thing I did in the other one. This is like sometimes when I want to see something analog in my face and I want to see graph. This is my second compressor, so I'll be doing it as I play the sound. I remember when I enter Lagos, make a hustle, make a find food to chop. My mama pray for me, she tell me, but don't only look up to God. Say street na jungle, lions stay for street. Then they find you the job, work hard, yo, don't look for trouble, do your best, yo, and the money go come. So as I enter Eko, I met my brother, yo. As you could see, the first thing I did, I set my ratio, then I set my attack to 0.5, that's the fastest. Then I now worked on my threshold to say like once I start getting to -3, even on this compressor you see a good range where it is 3 to 6, -3 to -6, within that range as I mentioned in the previous one. So you couldn't, once you start getting over -6, you're now almost like over compressing your sound, especially for vocals. It's not good to over compress your vocals. So once you now get this antenna dangling in between 6 and 3, then you know you are at the right spot. So now the last thing I did, since I'm losing like 3 dB or 6 or 4, I just had to increase my output to 5 to bring up the overall volume for everything that I've lost. So it's quite simple to compress a vocal. Now I could do that. I have a lot of compressors. I could do that with another compressor, the API 2500. The same process, nothing too special. Understand? So let me do that again on this sound. I remember when I enter Lagos, make a hustle, make a find food to chop. My mama pray for me, she tell me, but don't only look up to God. Say street na jungle, lions stay for street, yo. Then they find you to job, work hard, yo. Don't look for trouble, do your best, yo, and the money go. So the same stuff. Now I will do a bypass and bring it in so you hear what I did. I remember when I enter Lagos, make a hustle, make a find food to chop. My mama pray for me, she tell me, but don't only look up to. So you could see as I bring in the compressor, you find out that the vocal now has presence, now has power in the mix. And you should note that your vocal is the most important instrument in every song. Your vocal should have the highest attention. The ear is familiar with vocals. All your life you hear vocals, like people talking or people singing, people doing everything. You hear people talk every day of your life. So the ear has gotten used to the vocal. So the vocal is the most important. So I still have one last compressor, the V comp. So I'm trying to show you that it is not by the compressor you're using, it's by your idea, what sound you're going for, understanding what you're doing. Some compressors are more simple to look at than some others, but the more controls you have on the compressor, the better you have a control. You now have more controls and you get more of your sound than the sound of your compressor. There are some compressors that have only 2 knobs where you could their attack and release has been set automatically. You just do your input and output but then you will now be following any sound that comes out from the compressor based on the attack and the release that is in that compressor. So for this particular one, the first thing I would do, the compression is on. Then this analog sound, I have to turn it off unless I'm going for an analog kind of mix. Now in this analog sound, what this analog sound does is adding some white noise that they used to have in old records. So by turning it off, let me show you what it means. Let me bring up an EQ that has a visualizer. Now you can see these frequencies resonating down here. They are coming from this compressor because this compressor is giving it what's it called, analog kind of vibe. So when I turn it off, this thing is going to disappear. So you see, I could give it a 25% analog, 50% analog, or 100% analog. So but I don't need the analog sound in this one except if it's what I'm going for. So get out of the way. So the first thing I would do here is quite simple. The ratio is by default in this compressor set to 4:1 because that's almost like a sweet spot for the vocal. Then the release is auto, is quite better, or you could use 400 or 800 depending on how fast or how slow you want the compressor to leave the vocal, because the attack is how fast you want it to compress and the release is how fast or how slow you want it to get out from the compression. For kicks and bass, it's always good to have like a slower attack, then also a slow release, because this is physics actually. The low frequencies, they don't resonate very fast. This is physics. They don't go so fast like the high frequencies that repeat very fast. So for something that is going very slow, you need a very slow attack and slow release for the low frequencies. But for high frequencies, for stuff that happens so quick, you need like a fast attack and fast release. So that's another tip. But that is going to come in a multi-band compression video when I'm going to do that one separately. So you see how to use a multi-band compressor. So but for this guy, I'm trying to make it simple, and I don't want the video to get so long. So the first thing, this one is quite easy to use. You could use most of these plugins, they come with presets. You could load a preset. Maybe you want a kick drum kind of compression or stuff like that, or you want it should have a vocal. All of them should put there. Okay, lead vocal. Once you select it, the compressor will now adjust to what a lead vocal should sound. But I like doing all my stuff by myself. So in this particular one, the input is going to act as our threshold. The more you add, then the compressor already has this kind of automatic threshold stuff. It works with the input. So as I bring it in, by default it's already compressing over like 6 or 12, which I don't want. I want it to be around this 6, so I have to tweak it up or down till I'll be watching my meter. This meter is set to gain reduction, how much reduction we are. If I put it to in, it will be telling me how much sound is going into the compressor. If I put it to out, to tell me how much output is coming from. But it's best to leave it at gain reduction so you see what you're doing. Then I'll now compensate it with the output. Mama pray for me, she tell me but only look up to God. So I'm going to bypass and bring it in so you see the difference. I remember when I enter Lagos, make I find food to chop. My mama pray for me, she tell me but only look up. So it's always important to compress your vocal. Compress your vocal, EQ your vocals. Then other effects will now follow once you get these two right. So I wouldn't want this tutorial to be very long, but I'm going to make another tutorial on multi-band compression. That's a very important compression you should learn on how to use. So if you want me to make that particular one, so just leave some comments, subscribe, because that's the way you get the channel growing. Subscribe, like, comment, and tell me the kind of videos you want me to put out next so that I could look into it. I have tight schedules already, so but I'm using this is midnight, this is almost 1 a.m. so that's the only free time I have because I have a lot of mixes and works to do. So if you also want me to work on your stuff, you have a recorded vocal that you also want me to mix and master for you, you could, my number should be on the screen right now. You should just message me, then we could talk via email. You send me your file and get your work done. So subscribe, like, and wait for the next one that will be coming up pretty soon. So peace out.